Underrated. It's a term we hear thrown around a lot in the NBA community, and yet I just can't buy into it. I'm just tired of people calling anybody underrated without really thinking about it. So let's think about it. In this video, I want to really dive into what it means to be underrated, and also talk about the singular major NBA star in NBA history that I can officially, with 100% certainty, call truly underrated. Before that though, be sure to subscribe for weekly NBA content. Check out my new 30-minute documentary type video after you're done with this one. I dropped it a couple days back and just poured everything I had into it, and with that, let's hop into this. First off, I have to put this out there. I'm going to be bringing up certain NBA YouTubers, so just be aware that it's not a personal thing at all. It's just basketball talk. You really think I'm gonna sit here and slander Bezos as a person on my platform of like 100 subscribers? That'd just be pathetic. I'm just not here to do that or be that guy. The YouTubers I chose to look into, I chose out of respect. I used their clips and analyzed their content because I care about their opinions and know that they are genuine. That's why I hold so much value in the things that they say and the way they think about the concept of underrated players. I just had to get that out there. We're gonna get a little bit passionate in this video, so just know it's not personal at all. I'm also aware that a lot of the videos that I used as examples are old, but these ideas are still around. The NBA community hasn't made a massive shift against people like Alex English in the way they did with someone like John Stockton, which by the way was awesome. Alright, let's get into the nitty-gritty of things. How can we know for sure who's underrated and who's not? Well, there's two ways to approach the whole thing. These other YouTubers I'm talking about are making their claims in a very logical, seemingly inarguable fashion. Look at the numbers, look at the highlights, look at the accolades, bada bing bada boom, underrated.
So why is Sidney Moncrief so underrated? In reality, Sidney Moncrief was more than just a regular combo guard. Sidney Moncrief was a defensive player that was able to give you 20 to 23 points, along with 5 to 6 rebounds and 4 or 5 assists, which is something that's extremely productive. Going back to his accolades and his accomplishments, like I stated earlier, Sidney Moncrief is a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year.
And I'm on the other side, arguing that no, for someone to be underrated, you have to first be able to prove that players similar to this underrated player are getting a lot more praise and attention. Let me list off some common names you'll find in videos about underrated players: Alex English, George Gervin, Dominique Wilkins, and Adrian Dantley, just to name a few. Now, you might notice that these players are all somewhat similar, and not just because they're all scoring forwards. Let's look beyond that and go deeper into things. They all put up pretty impressive numbers for around a decade, and were somewhere around the 10th to 3rd best player in the league for a solid amount of time. So, are these players underrated, or is every player that had a similar career trajectory to those players all treated the exact same? Are you really underrated if you aren't an exception to the rule? This is pretty basic stuff. Players that aren't vocal, have no classic signature move, no great highlight or memorable moment to look back to, and no significant playoff run are always treated this way. Players who check off all of these boxes and somehow manage to continue to be talked about, they are the exceptions. They are the standouts, not someone like Alex English. So why are we acting so confused when nobody talks about Alex English? So now, before we can argue that English is so underrated, we first have to critique the way players like him in general are treated, since this problem is very clearly not specific to him. Really, anybody that you can pluck out from the NBA history books, and the most you'll lose out of doing so is a flashy basketball reference page, ends up getting forgotten. So now you have to group all of those players that this applies to and make your argument on behalf of all of them, which means that you can't just single out Alex English for no reason. Underrated underrated players videos always come with a sort of angry tone. This kind of, why are you leaving out this guy? I can't understand why he's treated this way kind of vibe. But usually there's a very clear reason why these players are treated this way. This isn't rocket science. We figured out why Alex English isn't talked about that much pretty quickly. I mean, just have an open mind, look into it, really ask yourself why. Don't treat it like a rhetorical question. Why is this player not talked about? Look into it. There's usually an answer. There are trends and cultural norms that apply to everybody, even Alex English. You also just gotta love how people will bring up a guy like Alex English only when they are listing off underrated players and in no other basketball related conversations. Great way to practice what you preach, eh? Apparently, Alex English is so underrated, and yet he's never talked about in any of these creators' other videos, and you won't hear his name being said by these same people in casual conversations. They're just non-existent outside of this realm of talking about underrated players. These YouTubers are doing the exact thing that the people they are questioning over why they don't talk about and appreciate Alex English more are now being scolded for. None of these YouTubers are lying, let's make that very clear, but you're really gonna call someone underrated when you talk about the NBA for a living and he's never brought up. It's almost as if Alex English doesn't matter. It's almost as if he didn't affect NBA history. And it's almost as if NBA fans remember only 3 or 4 players from each generation, and English rightfully didn't even make the cut even for you guys, as proven through your own videos where his name is never mentioned. It's almost like that because it is like that. Underrated players can't be the norm to the rule. They have to stand out. They have to do everything that somebody else did and receive a fourth of the recognition. And honestly, there's only one player that matches this description. There's only one player that we extracted from the history books even though he made a massive dent in it. There's only one player whose name can't be ignored when talking about his generation, and yet we instead choose to do that very thing and just rewrite an entire era of basketball. And there's only one player who was the #1 guy in the league for years that lots of modern day NBA fans don't even know the name of. I'm talking about Bob Pettit. Why does nobody talk about Bob freaking Pettit? I know I just argued that people tend to remember things like personality and playoff runs a lot more than impressive stats, but when you average 31 and 19 for a season and 26 and 16 for your entire career, that tends to not just get swept under the rug. Neither does winning 2 MVPs, beating the Celtics in the finals, dropping averages of 29 and 17 on Bill Russell's head, and finishing that same finals series off with a 50-point 19-rebound game. That doesn't just go away. And yet, for Pettit, it has. Wilt Chamberlain notoriously struggled against these Celtics teams, and only got the best of them in one season, where he had 3 other All-Stars alongside him, plus arguably the best coach in the league. Pettit had Cliff Hagan, a solid 20 and 10 guy, but after that, there was really no one else on these Hawks teams, and he beat the Celtics in 6 while it took Wilt 7 games. Pettit was an All-Star and All-NBA player for all 11 years of his career. He was a 2-time MVP, led the league in scoring twice, and get this, met Russell's Celtics in the finals 4 times. Boston won in 7 in 1957, the Hawks beat the Celtics in 6 in 1958, Boston got another in an extremely close 7-game series in 1960, and in 1961 they got a somewhat easy chip against the Hawks, beating them in 5. But outside of that 5-game series, all of these were really close. One could say this Russell versus Pettit beef was massive. One could say it was a rivalry, if you will. And you could say maybe this whole Bill Russell-Wilt Chamberlain thing is kinda overrated. I mean, Pettit's right there, hiding in plain sight, my guy. Give the man the love he deserves. Bob Pettit did everything right. He did everything just like all the other great players around him, and yet he's treated so differently. I'm really passionate about this, so I don't care. I'm calling people out by name. Rusty, where is Pettit? Like, not even top 50? At least he got a shout out at the end of the video in the honorable mentions. Also, you spelled the guy's name wrong. This just seems like a personal attack on the guy, and frankly, that goatee mustache thing you're rocking is a personal attack on the eyes of all of us viewers. I'm sorry, I had to get one in. I didn't have to get one in. I just did. I'm such a jerk. I don't even show my face, Jesus Christ. Austin Sweat, top 30 all-time list, where's Pettit? Bleacher Report, y'all put James Harden and John Stockton over someone who put up arguably better numbers and had undoubtedly more playoff success with less help. Loving the logic. Bezos also has a top 50 list out there, and because I've been forced to lower my expectations, I guess Pettit being ranked 26th overall isn't that bad. I only brought up his list because after revealing this next row of players, he felt as if he needed to single out Pettit and justify his placement. He predicted that there would be a lot of people in the comments laughing at the fact that Bob is so high, and honestly, he might be right.
Now again, for a couple of things to be addressed. Number one, Bob Pettit. Why is Bob Pettit in here? Because I know a lot of you guys will make fun of him for being a white old school player and laughing at the fact that he's above players like Chris Paul and James Harden, and you'll probably at me on Twitter with footage from the 40s or 50s. I can already see that in my head. Well, just put it this way. Bill Russell played from 1957 to 1969. Will Chamberlain, Oscar Robertson, and Jerry West played from around 1960 to 1973, give or take a couple of years. Bob Pettit played from 1955 to 1967. So he had a lot of overlap between those four players who many people have no problem putting in their top 30. He was an 11-time All-Star, an 11-time All-NBA member, a 2-time MVP, a 1-time champion, also being one of just 2 players in history to lead their team past Bill Russell's Celtics and stop him from being a perfect 13 of 13, the other player being Will Chamberlain, and put up career averages of 26 points and 16 rebounds. So please read more about Bob Pettit's career if you can, because I believe he is a highly underrated player.
This explanation that Bezos is forced to go on to justify only slightly underrating Pettit instead of full-on disrespecting the man is a testament to the fact that we really just let him go. Somehow, some way, Bob Pettit slipped through the cracks. And to me, that's both baffling and sad. Low-key, I might drop a top 50 of my own exclusively to give Pettit the credit he deserves. I've done zero planning for this, and I think I'm just kind of worked up right now, so it will pass me by, but if you want it, let me know. Oh yeah, and before we move on, allow me to drop one more massive example of Pettit getting overlooked, and this one is probably the worst. You guys remember that viral greatest players of all time draft segment the TNT crew had where Chuck, Kenny Smith, Reggie Miller, Chris Webber, Kevin McHale, and Steve Kerr all drafted their all-time teams against each other? Well, 60 players were drafted, and as you can see, no Pettit. Thankfully, at the end of the segment, the guys talked about the players they wished they took, and I'm just gonna let this one play out for you guys.
When you take a look at who's still left on the board, just give me a few names, shout out a few names that you wish you could have picked if you had a little more.
Walt Clyde Frazier.
JoJo White.
Adrian Dantley.
Yeah.
David Thompson and Dikembe Mutombo for me.
How about Bob Pettit with the most All-Star Game MVPs?
Bernard King and Rick Barry. In other words, he didn't care about Bob Pettit.
Yeah, not so much.
Well, Bob Pettit would have had his hands full.
Alright, I'll admit it, I'm officially triggered. I know that we all already know that Charles Barkley and Chris Webber aren't the most knowledgeable basketball minds, but hot take incoming, maybe you shouldn't disrespect an NBA player that was better than both of you. So, that's a true underrated player. I've gone through my reasoning before and I don't have to repeat myself, but I should clarify that, sure, there are other underrated players players out there. Personally, I think DeAndre Hunter, in comparison to other young up-and-coming scorers out there in the league, isn't fairly appreciated. But forgetting about Hunter doesn't really change anything. Forgetting about Pettit is rewriting history. On an all-time scale, Bob Pettit is the only truly underrated player. Everybody else that played the way he did, accomplished as much as he did, and put up numbers similar to his are just treated better. And with that, we conclude this video. Let me know if there are any other underrated legends that you think qualify as underrated under my personal definition for the term. Or just tell me how stupid I am for overthinking everything and getting so worked up on something so stupid. But hey, it's the Kagastomus channel. You better be getting used to me talking about random stuff that only interests me. I'd actually love to hear any rebuttals to my idea, and if anyone still wants to argue that Alex English is really underrated, I'm still open to hear you out. Obviously, everything in this video is subjective. We're really just discussing opinions and our interpretations of things. There's no right or wrong, I just have a different idea of what this term could mean. So be sure to have your voice heard in the comments. Alright, that's all I got to say for today. Don't forget to subscribe, even if you think you are. Just play it safe and do a quick check for me right now. And with that, stay safe out there.